Maya's fingers trembled as she traced the jagged scratches carved deep into the pearl-white paint of her Honda Civic. The metallic scraping sound echoed in her mind, the same sound she'd heard from her bedroom window at 2:47 a.m. 3 nights ago, when she'd assumed it was just another neighborhood cat knocking over garbage cans. Now, standing in the driveway under the harsh morning sun, she understood what she'd really heard. Her brother destroying 2 years of her life savings, one deliberate scratch at a time. The damage ran from the rear bumper to the front door handle on the driver's side, spelling out a message so crude and hateful that Maya's stomach churned reading it. This wasn't random vandalism. This wasn't some stranger's midnight revenge. The handwriting, if you could call these brutal gouges handwriting, matched the same aggressive slashes she'd seen Tyler make across homework assignments when he was frustrated. The same violent strokes he'd carved into their old wooden desk when their parents had grounded him last summer. "Maya, breakfast!" Her mother's voice drifted from the kitchen window, cheerful and oblivious. Linda Chen-Morrison had always been the type of mother who believed that family problems could be solved with pancakes and forced conversation around the dining table. She had no idea that her 23-year-old daughter was standing in the driveway staring at $2,000 worth of damage that would take months to save up for again. Maya's phone buzzed in her back pocket. A text from her best friend Zoe. "Coffee before your shift? You sounded weird on the phone last night." Maya almost laughed at the understatement. Weird didn't begin to cover the emotional whiplash of the past week. First, Tyler had been kicked out of his third college in 2 years for what their parents euphemistically called academic struggles, but what Maya knew was actually a combination of failed drug tests and unpaid debts to people who collected payments with interest. Then, he'd moved back into their childhood home, taking over Maya's old room and treating the house like his personal hotel, complete with rotating guests who left empty beer bottles in the garden and cigarette burns on the deck furniture. Maya had been saving for her own apartment, working double shifts at the veterinary clinic and tutoring high school students in biology on weekends. Every dollar had been carefully budgeted. Every purchase weighed against her goal of finally having her own space where she could study for her veterinary school entrance exams without Tyler's music bleeding through the walls at all hours, where she could invite friends over without worrying about his unpredictable mood swings, where she could simply exist without walking on eggshells around her parents' desperate attempts to help Tyler find his way. The car had been her compromise with herself. Not the apartment yet, but something that was entirely hers. She'd bought it used but immaculate from an elderly woman who'd only driven it to church and the grocery store. Maya had spent weekends detailing every surface, learning about maintenance schedules, even installing a small air freshener that smelled like lavender because it reminded her of her grandmother's garden. The car represented independence, responsibility, the future she was building one careful step at a time. Now Tyler had taken a key, literally, and carved his anger across her future. "Maya!" Her mother's voice carried a note of impatience now. "Your eggs are getting cold." Maya pulled her phone from her pocket and opened the camera app, taking photos from every angle. The documentation felt important, though she couldn't articulate why. Maybe because this felt like the beginning of something larger, something that would require evidence. The scratches told a story, and stories had power, even when, especially when, people preferred not to listen. She walked around to the passenger side, checking for additional damage, and stopped when she noticed something that made her pulse quicken. The small black device mounted just below her rearview mirror, barely visible through the tinted windshield, was still blinking its tiny red light. The dash cam she'd installed 6 months ago after a minor fender bender in the clinic parking lot. The device that recorded continuously, storing footage on a memory card she'd never bothered to check because nothing interesting ever happened during her careful, predictable drives to work and school. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized what this meant. Tyler had keyed her car in the driveway. her car with the dash cam. The dash cam that was angled to capture not just the road ahead, but also part of the driver's side of the vehicle. The dash cam that recorded audio. The dash cam that stored everything on a memory card currently sitting in a device that Tyler, in his rage-fueled vandalism, had forgotten existed. She climbed into the driver's seat, her hand shaking as she reached for the small device. The manual was still in her glove compartment, though she'd only skimmed it when she'd first installed the camera. Something about motion-activated recording, infrared night vision, automatic file storage. Features that had seemed like expensive overkill 6 months ago, but now felt like salvation. Maya Elizabeth Chen, her father's voice boomed from the front porch, using her full name in the tone that had meant trouble since she was 7 years old. David Morrison stood with his coffee mug and disapproving frown, wearing the weekend uniform of polo shirt and khakis that somehow made him look simultaneously approachable and authoritarian. "Your mother has called you 3 times. What are you doing out there?" Maya looked up at her father, then down at the dash cam in her hands, then back at the deep gouges across her car's surface. 3 nights ago, she'd been a daughter who trusted her parents to believe her, to support her, to see Tyler's destructive patterns for what they were. 3 nights ago, she had assumed that evidence and truth were the same thing, that justice and family loyalty could coexist. Now she understood that she was holding something more dangerous than a simple recording device. She was holding the power to shatter her parents' carefully constructed narrative about their son's rough patch, to force them to confront the difference between enabling and love, to prove definitively what they'd spent months choosing not to see. The question that would haunt her through everything that followed was simple. Did she really want to know what the footage would show? And if it showed what she suspected, was she ready for the family she'd known to never exist again? Maya slipped the dash cam into her jacket and walked toward the house, where her parents waited with breakfast and explanations she no longer believed, and Tyler slept off another hangover, completely unaware that his sister now held the key to unlocking 2 years of lies, manipulation, and carefully orchestrated denial. The red recording light had captured everything. The only question now was whether Maya had the courage to watch. Maya sat at the kitchen table, mechanically cutting her pancakes into perfect squares while her parents discussed Tyler's future with the determined optimism of people who'd had this conversation 100 times before. Her mother had arranged the breakfast spread like a peace offering: fresh berries, real maple syrup, the good china that usually only appeared during holidays. She recognized the gesture for what it was: Linda's way of creating normalcy through ritual, of pretending that their family breakfast tradition could somehow smooth over the chaos Tyler brought wherever he went. "Dr. Hendricks thinks Tyler just needs structure," Linda was saying, spooning scrambled eggs onto plates that no one was really eating. "The counseling program at the community college has wonderful success stories, people who've turned their whole lives around." David nodded, though Maya caught the slight tightening around his eyes that indicated he was working hard to believe his own words. The job at Uncle Mark's construction company could be exactly what he needs. Physical work, clear expectations, being around men who have built successful lives with their hands. Maya pushed food around her plate and wondered when her parents had become such skilled practitioners of magical thinking. Tyler had been through structure before: boarding school, military summer camps, 3 different colleges with increasingly lower academic standards. He'd been through counseling, both individual and family sessions, where Maya had been required to participate in discussions about family dynamics and communication styles, as if Tyler's problems were somehow shared burdens that they all needed to address together. What her parents carefully avoided mentioning was the pattern underneath all their hopeful plans. Tyler would charm his way into every new opportunity, convince everyone that this time was different, that he'd learned from his mistakes and was ready to become the responsible adult they all wanted him to be. For 3 to 6 months, he'd maintain the facade. He'd show up on time, complete assignments, even help around the house without being asked. Their parents would exhale in relief, sharing meaningful looks across the dinner table that said, "See, we never gave up on him. Love really can conquer anything." Then something would shift. Maya had learned to recognize the warning signs. Tyler's smile becoming slightly forced, his helpfulness turning mechanical, his eyes developing a trapped animal quality that meant he was looking for an escape. Soon there would be missed shifts at work, forgotten assignments, money going missing from wallets left on kitchen counters. By the time their parents noticed the warning signs, Tyler would already be 3-stepped into his next spectacular failure, leaving confusion and damage in his wake while he moved on to blame everyone else for not understanding his unique struggles. Maya had been watching this cycle repeat for 8 years since Tyler turned 16, and their parents' well-meaning attempts to guide him transformed into increasingly desperate attempts to save him from himself. She'd learned to love her brother in the spaces between his disasters, to hold on to memories of the Tyler who'd built blanket forts with her when they were kids, who'd taught her to ride a bike by running alongside her for an entire afternoon until her legs were strong enough to keep going alone. But she'd also learned that loving someone didn't make them safe. Loving someone didn't mean you had to pretend their choices weren't destroying everything around them. Loving someone didn't mean you had to sacrifice your own future to enable their refusal to grow up. "Maya, you're awfully quiet," Linda said, settling into her chair with the forced brightness that Maya recognized as her mother's crisis management voice. "How are things going with your MCAT prep?" The question felt like a test. Maya knew her mother was hoping for an enthusiastic response, some indication that Maya's dreams of veterinary school were proceeding according to plan, despite the chaos Tyler brought to every family gathering. But Maya found herself thinking about the keyed car in the driveway, about the $2,000 she'd now need to spend on paint repair instead of application fees and testing materials. "It's fine," Maya said, which was technically true if you defined fine as completely overwhelming when you're trying to study while your brother plays video games at full volume until 3 a.m. and brings strangers into the house who smoke in the bathroom and leave beer cans in the hallway. David leaned forward with the earnest expression that meant he was about to offer unsolicited advice. "You know, sweetheart, veterinary school will always be there. Maybe this is a good time to take a gap year. Help Tyler get settled into his new routine. Family has to support family." Maya's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. This was the conversation she'd been dreading, the one where her parents asked her to put her life on hold, again, to serve as Tyler's unofficial keeper, therapist, and safety net. She'd been Tyler's keeper through high school, covering for him when he missed curfew, lending him money that he never repaid, lying to their parents about where he went and who he was with because he'd convinced her that protecting him was the same thing as protecting the family. She'd been Tyler's keeper through his first college disaster, driving 4 hours each way to pick him up when he got too drunk to function, wire him money when his meal plan ran out 3 weeks into the semester, and help him pack his belongings when he inevitably got kicked out of the dorms. She'd been Tyler's keeper through the community college experiment, the job at the pizza place, the brief period when he claimed to be pursuing a career as a personal trainer and spent their parents' money on supplements instead of certification classes. Maya had spent 7 years of her life believing that if she just supported Tyler hard enough, loved him consistently enough, covered for his mistakes long enough, he would eventually become the person she remembered from their childhood. She had sacrificed study time to drive him places, used her own money to pay for his mistakes, rearranged her schedule around his crises, and convinced herself that this was what good sisters did. Was different, that he'd learned from his mistakes and was ready to become the responsible adult they all wanted him to be. For 3 to 6 months, he'd maintain the facade. He'd show up on time, complete assignments, even help around the house without being asked. Their parents would exhale in relief, sharing meaningful looks across the dinner table that said, "See, we never gave up on him. Love really can conquer anything." Then something would shift. Maya had learned to recognize the warning signs. Tyler's smile becoming slightly forced, his helpfulness turning mechanical, his eyes developing a trapped animal quality that meant he was looking for an escape. Soon there would be missed shifts at work, forgotten assignments, money going missing from wallets left on kitchen counters. By the time their parents noticed the warning signs, Tyler would already be three-stepped into his next spectacular failure, leaving confusion and damage in his wake while he moved on to blame everyone else for not understanding his unique struggles. Maya had been watching this cycle repeat for 8 years since Tyler turned 16, and their parents' well-meaning attempts to guide him transformed into increasingly desperate attempts to save him from himself. She'd learned to love her brother in the spaces between his disasters, to hold on to memories of the Tyler who'd built blanket forts with her when they were kids, who'd taught her to ride a bike by running alongside her for an entire afternoon until her legs were strong enough to keep going alone. But she'd also learned that loving someone didn't make them safe. Loving someone didn't mean you had to pretend their choices weren't destroying everything around them. Loving someone didn't mean you had to sacrifice your own future to enable their refusal to grow up. "Maya, you're awfully quiet," Linda said, settling into her chair with the forced brightness that Maya recognized as her mother's crisis management voice. "How are things going with your MCAT prep?" The question felt like a test. Maya knew her mother was hoping for an enthusiastic response, some indication that Maya's dreams of veterinary school were proceeding according to plan, despite the chaos Tyler brought to every family gathering. But Maya found herself thinking about the keyed car in the driveway, about the $2,000 she'd now need to spend on paint repair instead of application fees and testing materials. "It's fine," Maya said, which was technically true if you defined fine as completely overwhelming when you're trying to study while your brother plays video games at full volume until 3 a.m. and brings strangers into the house who smoke in the bathroom and leave beer cans in the hallway. David leaned forward with the earnest expression that meant he was about to offer unsolicited advice. "You know, sweetheart, veterinary school will always be there. Maybe this is a good time to take a gap year. Help Tyler get settled into his new routine. Family has to support family." Maya's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. This was the conversation she'd been dreading, the one where her parents asked her to put her life on hold, again, to serve as Tyler's unofficial keeper, therapist, and safety net. She'd been Tyler's keeper through high school, covering for him when he missed curfew, lending him money that he never repaid, lying to their parents about where he went and who he was with because he'd convinced her that protecting him was the same thing as protecting the family. She'd been Tyler's keeper through his first college disaster, driving 4 hours each way to pick him up when he got too drunk to function, wire him money when his meal plan ran out 3 weeks into the semester, and help him pack his belongings when he inevitably got kicked out of the dorms. She'd been Tyler's keeper through the community college experiment, the job at the pizza place, the brief period when he claimed to be pursuing a career as a personal trainer, and spent their parents' money on supplements instead of certification classes. Maya had spent 7 years of her life believing that if she just supported Tyler hard enough, loved him consistently enough, covered for his mistakes long enough, he would eventually become the person she remembered from their childhood. She had sacrificed study time to drive him places, used her own money to pay for his mistakes, rearranged her schedule around his crises, and convinced herself that this was what good sisters did. The realization that she'd been enabling him instead of helping him had come gradually, like watching a slow-motion car accident where each frame revealed another layer of damage you hadn't noticed before. Tyler didn't get better when people protected him from consequences. He got worse. He got more entitled, more careless, more convinced that other people existed to clean up his messes. And Maya had been the most dedicated cleaner of all. "I can't take a gap year, Dad," Maya said quietly, setting down her fork. "I've already deferred once to help Tyler. I'm 23 years old. I need to build my own life." Linda's face crumpled slightly, the careful composure slipping just enough to reveal the exhaustion underneath. Sweetheart, I know it feels like we ask a lot from you, but Tyler needs stability right now, and you're so good with him. You're the only one who can get through to him when he's struggling. Maya felt the familiar weight of that responsibility, the crushing burden of being the only family member who could somehow magically fix Tyler's problems through sheer force of sibling love. She'd carried that weight so long it had become part of her identity. Maya, the responsible one. Maya, the problem solver. Maya, who could always be counted on to sacrifice her needs for the family's greater good. But sitting in the kitchen with her parents' hopeful faces turned toward her, Maya felt something shift inside her chest. Maybe it was the memory of the scratches on her car, or the weight of the dash cam in her jacket pocket, or simply the accumulated exhaustion of trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved. Whatever it was, she finally found the courage to say the words she'd been holding back for years. "Tyler doesn't need more stability from me," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Tyler needs to experience the consequences of his choices, and I need to stop protecting him from those consequences." The silence that followed felt like the moment before thunder, when the air pressure changes and you know the storm is about to break. Maya watched her parents exchange a look that contained years of unspoken agreements, shared fears, and mutual denial. They saw them recalculating, trying to figure out how to maintain their family's careful balance now that she was refusing to play her assigned role. Tyler chose that moment to shuffle into the kitchen, wearing yesterday's clothes and the hollow-eyed look that meant he was nursing a hangover. He moved with the careful deliberation of someone trying not to let their head explode, pouring coffee with shaking hands and avoiding eye contact with everyone at the table. "Morning, family," he mumbled, collapsing into the empty chair next to Maya. Up close, she could smell the stale alcohol on his breath, see the tremor in his hands that he was trying to hide by keeping them wrapped around his coffee mug. Maya looked at her brother, really looked at him, and saw something that broke her heart and hardened her resolve simultaneously. Tyler was 25 years old, but he moved through the world with the emotional regulation skills of a teenager. He'd never learned to handle disappointment, frustration, or responsibility because there had always been someone there to handle it for him. Their parents had spent so much time protecting him from the natural consequences of his choices that he'd never developed the skills to make better choices. And Maya had been his most dedicated protector of all. "Tyler," she said quietly, watching him flinch at the sound of his name, "we need to talk about my car." Tyler's eyes darted to their parents, looking for rescue, looking for someone to change the subject or create a distraction. But Maya held his gaze, and for the first time in years, she didn't look away when he tried to deflect with humor or manipulation or sudden helplessness. "What about your car?" Tyler asked, his voice carefully neutral. Maya reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the dash cam, setting it on the table between them like a small black bomb. "I installed this 6 months ago. It records everything that happens in the driveway, including what happened 3 nights ago at 2:47 a.m. Maya had spent her entire adult life trying to protect Tyler from moments like this, trying to shield him from the consequences of his choices, trying to love him back to health through sheer force of will. But as she sat at the family breakfast table with evidence of his latest betrayal literally in her hands, she realized that protection and love weren't the same thing at all. Sometimes love meant stepping back and letting someone fall, trusting that they were strong enough to get back up. Sometimes love meant refusing to be a safety net, even when every instinct screamed at you to catch them one more time. Sometimes love meant letting the truth break everything apart so something healthier could grow in its place. Maya looked at the dash cam, then at her brother, then at her parents, who were finally beginning to understand that this breakfast was about to become something they couldn't fix with pancakes and forced optimism. The recording device sat on the table between them, small and black and patient, holding secrets that would change everything once they decided to look. The living room felt smaller when the family gathered there 20 minutes later, as if the walls had physically contracted to contain the tension radiating from the 4 people arranged in their habitual crisis positions. Maya sat in the armchair that had been her designated spot since childhood, the dashcam clutched in her hands like a talisman. Tyler sprawled across the couch with studied casualness, scrolling through his phone in a performance of indifference that didn't quite hide the nervous energy vibrating through his shoulders. Their parents flanked him on either side. David perched on the edge of the cushions with his jaw set in the expression that meant he was preparing for battle. Linda twisting her wedding ring around her finger in the repetitive gesture that had worn a permanent groove in the gold band. "Okay, sweetheart," Linda said in her most reasonable voice, the tone she'd perfected through years of mediating family conflicts. "Let's talk about whatever has you so upset. I'm sure there's a perfectly logical explanation for whatever you think you saw." Maya noticed the careful phrasing, "whatever you think you saw," as if her perception of reality was inherently unreliable, as if she were prone to dramatic overreactions that required patient correction from more level-headed family members. It was a familiar dynamic, one that Maya realized she'd internalized so completely that she'd spent years questioning her own reactions to Tyler's behavior, wondering if maybe she was being too sensitive, too rigid, too unforgiving of her brother's struggles. "Maya, I didn't think I saw anything," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I saw someone key my car 3 nights ago. Deep scratches from the rear bumper to the front door handle. Scratches that spell out words I won't repeat in front of Mom." Tyler's thumb paused on his phone screen for just a fraction of a second before resuming its scrolling. "That's terrible," he said without looking up. "Do you have any idea who might have done something like that? Maybe someone from work who has a grudge against you." The suggestion was delivered with such apparent sincerity that Maya felt a moment of dizzy disorientation, as if reality itself had shifted slightly to the left. Tyler's ability to lie with complete conviction while looking directly at the evidence of his deception was a skill Maya had watched him develop over years of practice, but it never stopped surprising her. He didn't just deny wrongdoing, he genuinely seemed to believe his own denials, as if his emotional investment in a particular version of events could somehow retroactively make it true. David leaned forward, his lawyer instincts engaging. "Maya, I understand you're upset about the vandalism. Property damage is a serious crime and will absolutely report it to the police if you want to pursue that route, but you can't just accuse family members without evidence."
"I have evidence," Maya said, lifting the dash cam slightly. "That's what this is." "You have a camera," Linda corrected gently. "That doesn't necessarily mean it recorded anything useful. Those devices are notoriously unreliable, especially in low-light conditions." Maya stared at her mother, recognizing the preemptive rationalization that would allow Linda to dismiss whatever the footage revealed. Her parents had spent years perfecting the art of explaining away Tyler's behavior, creating elaborate alternative narratives that preserved their image of him as a fundamentally good person who just happened to make unfortunate choices when he was under stress. "The camera has night vision," Maya said. "It's motion activated. It stores everything on a memory card." Tyler finally looked up from his phone, his expression shifting to what Maya recognized as his concerned brother face. "Maya, you're really worked up about this. Maybe you should take some time to calm down before you start making accusations that could damage family relationships permanently." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that Maya felt her resolve waver for a moment. Tyler had always been gifted at making her doubt herself, at suggesting that her emotional reactions were excessive responses to minor problems. He could make her feel crazy for expecting basic respect, selfish for prioritizing her own needs, cruel for refusing to enable his self-destructive patterns. But this time, Maya had something Tyler couldn't argue away or reinterpret or minimize. She had objective truth stored on a digital device, immune to manipulation or alternative explanations. "I'm going to watch the footage," Maya said, pulling out her laptop from her bag beside the chair. "Right now, in front of all of you." The energy in the room shifted immediately. Tyler's casual posture became slightly rigid, his phone forgotten in his lap. Linda's ring twisting accelerated, the gold band spinning around her finger like a nervous prayer wheel. David's expression hardened into the mask he wore during difficult depositions, when he needed to control every variable in a situation that threatened to spiral beyond his influence. "Sweetheart," Linda said quickly, "maybe this isn't the best way to handle family problems. We could talk to Tyler privately, give him a chance to explain." "Explain what?" Maya asked, inserting the memory card into her laptop.
Mom, you just said there probably wasn't anything useful on the camera. If that's true, then there's nothing for Tyler to explain. Tyler stood up abruptly, pacing to the window with the restless energy of a trapped animal. "This is insane," he said, his voice rising slightly. "You're treating me like a criminal in my own home, over some scratches on a car that could have been made by anyone." Maya's laptop hummed to life, the screen casting blue light across the tense faces gathered in the living room. She navigated to the dashcam folder, her heart pounding as she scrolled through timestamps from the past week. The files were labeled with dates and times, organized in neat chronological order that made it easy to find exactly what she was looking for. "Here," she said, double-clicking on a file labeled August 12, 2:47 a.m. "Let's see what really happened." The video opened in full-screen mode, showing the familiar view from Maya's windshield. The driveway, part of the garage, the edge of the front lawn illuminated by the motion sensor security light. For the first few seconds, everything was still and peaceful. The kind of suburban midnight scene that belonged in a home security commercial. Then Tyler appeared at the edge of the frame. Maya's breath caught in her throat as she watched her brother approach her car with purposeful steps, something metallic glinting in his right hand. Even in the infrared footage, his face was clearly visible, his expression focused and determined rather than impulsively angry. This wasn't a moment of heated passion or drunken poor judgment. This was deliberate destruction, planned and executed with careful precision. The audio was crystal clear. Maya heard Tyler's voice, slightly slurred but perfectly understandable, muttering a steady stream of complaints as he carved his anger into her car's paint. "Fucking perfect, Maya. Always showing me up. Little princess with her perfect grades and her perfect job. Think you're better than everyone? See how perfect you are now." Each word hit Maya like a physical blow. This wasn't random vandalism or misdirected frustration. This was targeted hatred. Years of resentment finally finding an outlet in deliberate and cruel action.
Destruction of something she'd worked hard to earn. Tyler hadn't just keyed her car. He'd performed surgery on it, cutting away pieces of her independence with surgical precision. The silence in the living room was deafening. Maya looked up from the laptop to see her family's faces illuminated by the screen's glow, each expression reflecting a different stage of processing the truth they'd just witnessed. Tyler stood frozen by the window, his back to the room, his shoulders set in the rigid line that meant he was calculating his next move. Linda sat with her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks as years of willful blindness crumbled around her. David stared at the screen with the blank expression of someone whose entire worldview had just been proven fundamentally incorrect. "Well," Maya said, her voice surprisingly steady, "I guess that settles the question of who keyed my car." Tyler turned from the window, his face cycling through expressions too quickly for Maya to track: denial, anger, shame, desperation, and finally landing on defiance. "You set me up," he said, his voice sharp with accusation. "You planted that camera to spy on me, to collect evidence against me like I'm some kind of criminal?" Maya felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep in her chest, the kind of hysterical sound that emerged when reality became too absurd to process normally. "I installed a dashcam 6 months ago because of a fender bender at work. You keyed my car because you were drunk and angry and you wanted to hurt me. Those are facts, Tyler. They're not a setup or a conspiracy or a misunderstanding." "You don't know what it's like," Tyler said, his voice rising to the volume that meant he was shifting into full victim mode. "Living in this house with everyone waiting for you to fail, everyone comparing you to perfect Maya who never makes mistakes, who never needs help, who has everything figured out." Maya watched her brother transform before her eyes, morphing from the deliberate vandal on the screen into the wounded child who needed protection from the consequences of his choices. It was a performance she'd seen countless times, polished through years of practice until it felt almost genuine. But this time, she had evidence that couldn't be reinterpreted or explained away. "Tyler," she said quietly,
You destroyed my car because you were angry about your own choices. You can't make that my fault or mom and dad's fault or anyone else's fault. You made a decision to take your frustration out on something that belonged to me. And now you need to deal with the consequences of that decision. David finally found his voice, though it sounded strained and unfamiliar. "Son," he said, using the formal tone that meant he was struggling to reconcile the Tyler on the screen with the Tyler he'd been defending for years. "The evidence is pretty clear here. I think you owe your sister an apology and a plan for making this right." Tyler's expression shifted again, this time landing on the wounded bewilderment that had been his most effective manipulation tactic since childhood. "I can't believe my own family is ganging up on me like this. I made a mistake, okay? I was drunk and angry, and I wasn't thinking clearly, but you're all acting like I'm some kind of monster." Linda stood up abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to hold her composure together through physical pressure. "Tyler, honey, we're not ganging up on you. But what you did, the things you said on that recording, that's not the person we raised you to be." "Maybe it's exactly the person you raised me to be. Maybe when you spend your whole life telling someone they're disappointing everyone around them, they eventually start believing it and acting like it." Maya closed her laptop with a sharp click, the sound cutting through Tyler's self-pity like a blade. "Stop," she said, her voice carrying an authority she didn't know she possessed. "Tyler, you're 25 years old, Tyler. You're not a victim of our parents' expectations or my success or anyone else's behavior. You're a grown man who chose to destroy something that didn't belong to you because you were angry about your own life." She stood up, clutching the dash cam and her laptop, feeling the weight of years of enabling and excuses and second chances. "I'm not going to sit here and listen to you blame everyone else for your choices. I'm not going to help you find reasons why this isn't your fault. And I'm not going to pretend that loving you means protecting you from the consequences of your actions." Tyler stared at her with something that might have been genuine surprise, as if he couldn't quite process this version of Maya, the Maya who refused to be guilted into silence, who wouldn't absorb his anger and transform it into understanding, who declined to serve as his emotional dumping ground. "Maya," Linda said tentatively, "maybe we could all sit down and figure out a payment plan for the repairs, as a family." Maya looked at her mother, really looked at her, and saw the desperate hope that they could somehow return to the careful balance they'd maintained for years, where Tyler's problems were everyone's problems, and Maya's needs came last because she was strong enough to handle disappointment. "No, Mom," Maya said gently. "This isn't a family problem. This is Tyler's problem, and Tyler needs to solve it himself." She walked toward the living room doorway, then turned back to address her brother directly. "Tyler, you have 48 hours to give me a plan for paying for the damage to my car. $2,000, which is what the body shop quoted me this morning. If you don't have a plan by then, I'm filing a police report and letting the legal system handle it." Tyler's face went pale, the reality of actual consequences finally penetrating his wall of justifications. "Maya, come on. You can't seriously be threatening to have your own brother arrested." Maya felt something settle in her chest, a kind of peace she hadn't experienced in years. "I'm not threatening anything, Tyler. I'm telling you what's going to happen. You have 48 hours to show me that you understand the seriousness of what you did and that you're committed to making it right. If you can't do that, then I'll let the police handle it." She left the living room with her family's shocked silence following her down the hallway, carrying with her the dash cam that had finally given her the power to stop being Tyler's keeper and start being his sister instead. For the first time in years, Maya felt like she could breathe. Maya's phone started ringing at 6:23 a.m. the next morning, yanking her from the first peaceful sleep she had in months. Linda's contact photo, a smiling family portrait from last Christmas where everyone looked happy and functional, glowed accusingly from the screen. She let it go to voicemail, then watched as it immediately started ringing again. By the fourth call, Maya realized her mother wasn't going to give up. She answered with the groggy irritation of someone who'd been woken up on her day off. "Mom, it's barely past 6. But sweetheart, thank God." Linda's voice carried the frantic energy that meant she'd been awake all night, probably pacing the kitchen and rehearsing this conversation. "We need to talk about yesterday, about Tyler. I think maybe we all said some things in the heat of the moment that we didn't really mean." Maya sat up in bed, instantly alert despite the early hour. She recognized the tone. This was Linda in full crisis management mode, ready to deploy every weapon in her considerable arsenal of maternal guilt and emotional manipulation to restore the family's equilibrium. "Maya, I meant exactly what I said." "But, sweetheart, he's your brother. Family doesn't call the police on family. What would people think? What would your grandmother say?" Maya almost laughed at the predictability of it.
Herself, who told her in heavily accented English that being a good daughter didn't mean being a doormat. "Nai would tell me to get the money Tyler owes me," Maya said firmly. She didn't believe in making excuses for people who refused to take responsibility for their choices. "That's not fair, Maya. You know Tyler has been struggling with depression and anxiety. He needs support from his family, not ultimatums and threats." Maya felt the familiar tug of guilt, the well-trained response to her mother's emotional manipulation. For years, Linda had successfully reframed Tyler's destructive behavior as symptoms of mental illness that required family accommodation rather than consequences. Maya had internalized this narrative so completely that she'd spent years feeling selfish for having boundaries, cruel for expecting basic respect, unreasonable for refusing to sacrifice her own well-being for Tyler's emotional comfort. But sitting in her bed with morning light filtering through the curtains, Maya found herself thinking about the Tyler on the dash cam footage. Focused, deliberate, articulate in his hatred. That hadn't been depression or anxiety speaking. That had been entitlement and rage. The toxic combination of someone who'd never learned that other people weren't responsible for managing his emotions. "Mom, mental illness doesn't make you key someone's car while calling them names. Mental illness doesn't make you target your sister's independence because you're angry about your own choices. Tyler chose to do what he did, and now he needs to choose how he is going to fix it." The silence that followed was loaded with years of unspoken agreements about how their family operated, what roles everyone played, what topics were off limits for honest discussion. Maya could practically hear her mother recalculating, searching for a different angle of attack. "Your father and I talked all night, sweetheart. We're worried about you, sweetheart. This isn't like you, being so rigid, so unforgiving. Maybe you should talk to someone about these angry feelings you're having toward Tyler." Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. Her mother was suggesting therapy for Maya, the victim of Tyler's vandalism, while carefully avoiding any suggestion that Tyler might need professional help for his destructive behavior. It was such a perfect example of their family's dysfunction that Maya almost admired its twisted logic. "I'm not angry, Mom. I'm done enabling." "That's a very harsh word, Maya. We prefer to think of it as supporting family through difficult times." Maya hung up. Her phone immediately started ringing again, but this time she turned it off completely. She needed coffee and clarity before she could handle any more attempts to gaslight her back into her old role as Tyler's unpaid emotional caretaker. 20 minutes later, sitting in her kitchen with her first cup of coffee and her laptop open to the dashcam footage, Maya watched the recording again with fresh eyes.
This time, she noticed details she'd missed during the emotional chaos of the family confrontation. Tyler's movements were steady and coordinated, not the stumbling, impaired actions of someone too drunk to control their behavior. His voice was clear and articulate, his words chosen with deliberate cruelty rather than slurred with alcohol-induced confusion. Most telling of all was the timing. Tyler appeared in the frame at 2:47 a.m., but Maya could hear voices and movement in the background that suggested he'd been awake and active for hours before deciding to vandalize her car. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was premeditated destruction, carefully planned and executed when he thought no one would see. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message. She'd forgotten to turn off notifications when she'd powered down the device. Tyler, can we talk? I think there's been a misunderstanding.
Maya stared at the message, recognizing the carefully neutral tone that Tyler used when he was preparing to deploy his most sophisticated manipulation tactics. She could predict the conversation with depressing accuracy. He would acknowledge making a mistake, express regret for hurting her feelings, and then gradually shift the focus to his own pain and need for understanding. By the end, somehow Maya would find herself apologizing for being too harsh and agreeing to some compromise that protected Tyler from meaningful consequences. Instead of responding, Maya opened her contacts and scrolled to a number she hadn't called in over a year. Zoe Chen, her best friend from college, now a social worker, specializing in family systems therapy. Zoe had been gently suggesting for years that Maya's family dynamics were unhealthy, but Maya had always defended their close-knit bonds and mutual support system. Now she wondered if Zoe had seen what Maya had been too emotionally invested to recognize. "Maya!" Zoe's voice was warm with genuine surprise and pleasure. "I was just thinking about you yesterday. How are things?" "Actually, not great." Maya found herself summarizing the past 24 hours. The keyed car, the dashcam footage, the family confrontation, her mother's early morning guilt campaign. As she spoke, she heard how the story sounded from an outside perspective. A 25-year-old man deliberately destroying his sister's property while their parents worked overtime to protect him from consequences. "Jesus, Maya," said Zoe when Maya finished. "How are you feeling about all this?" It was such a simple question, but Maya realized that no one in her family had asked it. They'd focused on Tyler's feelings, on the family's reputation, on maintaining their carefully constructed narrative about Tyler's struggles. But no one had asked how Maya felt about having her property destroyed by someone she'd spent years protecting and supporting. "Angry," Maya said, surprised by the honesty of her own response. "Really, really angry. And also relieved, which makes me feel guilty." "Relieved how?" Maya took a deep breath, trying to articulate feelings she'd barely admitted to herself. "Relieved that I finally have proof that I'm not crazy. Relieved that I don't have to pretend Tyler's behavior is normal anymore. Relieved that I can stop trying to save someone who doesn't want to be saved." "Maya, can I share something with you? As a friend, not as a social worker?" "Of course." What you're describing, your family's response to Tyler's behavior, it's textbook enabling. Your parents have created a system where Tyler never experiences natural consequences for his choices, so he never develops the internal motivation to change. And you've been conscripted into maintaining that system by being his safety net whenever his choices create problems. Maya felt tears prick her eyes, though she couldn't identify whether they were tears of relief or grief. "I thought I was being a good sister." "You were being a loyal sister, but loyalty and love aren't the same thing. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and let someone learn from their mistakes." After hanging up with Zoe, Maya felt lighter somehow, as if naming the dysfunction had reduced its power over her. She decided to spend the day doing normal 23-year-old activities: grocery shopping, laundry, studying for her upcoming MCAT practice test. Activities that belonged to her own life rather than crisis management for someone else's poor choices. She was folding laundry when her doorbell rang at 3:30 p.m. Through the peephole, she saw Tyler standing on her front step, holding a bouquet of grocery store flowers and wearing the hangdog expression that had gotten him out of trouble since childhood. Maya considered not answering, but curiosity won out. She opened the door but didn't invite him in. "Maya, I'm so sorry.
Tyler began, his voice thick with emotion that might or might not have been genuine. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. I was drunk and angry, and I took it out on you, which was completely wrong.
Maya waited, recognizing this as the opening movement of Tyler's apology symphony. Acknowledgement of wrongdoing, followed by explanations that gradually shifted responsibility away from him. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, Tyler continued, about taking responsibility for my choices. And you're right. I need to make this right. Okay, Maya said neutrally. How? Tyler's expression flickered slightly, as if he'd expected more emotional response to his apology. Well, I don't have $2,000 right now, but I could work out a payment plan with you. Maybe $100 a month until it's paid off? Maya did quick math in her head. That would take almost 2 years, Tyler, during which time I'd have to drive around with the damage visible or pay for the repairs myself and hope you actually follow through on the payments. I know it's not ideal, Tyler said quickly, but I'm trying to do the right thing here. I'm trying to take responsibility. No, Maya said, the word coming out more firmly than she'd expected. You're trying to minimize the consequences of your choices. Taking responsibility would mean finding a way to pay for the damage immediately, even if that means getting a job or selling something or asking someone for a loan. Tyler's expression shifted, the mask of contrition slipping to reveal frustration underneath. Maya, be reasonable. Where am I supposed to get $2,000? You know I don't have that kind of money. Then you should have thought about that before you decided to key my car. Look, I said I was sorry. I brought you flowers. I'm offering to pay you back. What more do you want from me? Maya stared at her brother, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in her adult life. Tyler genuinely believed that his apology and minimal payment offer represented taking full responsibility for his actions. He couldn't understand why Maya wasn't grateful for his willingness to slowly reimburse her for damage he deliberately caused. Maya, I want you to understand that your choices have consequences, Maya said quietly. I want you to care enough about the people you've hurt to make genuine amends, not token gestures that make you feel better about what you did. That's what I'm trying to do. No, Tyler, you're trying to get me to accept the minimum possible consequence for maximum possible credit. You're treating this like a negotiation instead of accepting responsibility for the damage you caused. Tyler's face flushed red, his careful composure finally cracking. You know what, Maya? You're being completely unreasonable. I'm trying to do the right thing here, and you're acting like I'm some kind of criminal. Maybe if you weren't so perfect all the time, people wouldn't feel so much pressure to live up to your impossible standards. There it was, the real Tyler underneath all the apologies and flower-bearing gestures. The Tyler who believed that other people's expectations were responsible for his poor choices, that Maya's success was somehow an attack on his self-esteem, that being held accountable for vandalism was unreasonable harassment. Tyler, I'm giving you 36 more hours to come up with a real plan for paying for the damage. If you can't do that, I'm filing a police report. She closed the door on his protests and turned off her phone again, finally understanding that some relationships couldn't be saved through love and loyalty alone. Sometimes the kindest thing you could do for someone was refuse to enable their self-destruction, even when, especially when, they hated you for it. Maya picked up Tyler's grocery store flowers from where he dropped them on her doorstep and threw them in the trash. Then she went back to folding laundry, focusing on the simple satisfaction of creating order from chaos in the parts of her life she could actually control. For the first time in years, she felt like she was taking care of herself instead of everyone else. It was a strange sensation, but not an unpleasant one. 36 hours later, Maya sat in the waiting area of the police station, watching Tyler pace the lobby like a caged animal while their parents flanked her on either side of the hard plastic chairs. The fluorescent lighting cast an unflattering pallor over everyone's skin, making the family meeting feel like something out of a medical drama where someone was about to receive devastating news. David sat with his lawyer posture, back straight,
jaw set, hands folded in his lap in a way that suggested he was restraining himself from taking charge of a situation he couldn't control. Linda clutched a tissue box like a security blanket, her eyes red-rimmed from what Maya assumed had been another sleepless night of trying to figure out how to rescue Tyler from the consequences of his choices. "This is insane," Tyler muttered for the fourth time in 10 minutes, his voice carrying the brittle edge that meant he was oscillating between panic and rage. "I can't believe you're actually going through with this, Maya. I can't believe you'd rather destroy our family than accept an apology." Maya looked up from the police report forms she'd been filling out, noting how Tyler had reframed the situation to cast himself as the victim of Maya's unreasonable demands rather than the perpetrator of deliberate vandalism. Even now, facing the possibility of criminal charges, he couldn't seem to grasp that this was the natural result of his own choices. "I gave you 48 hours to come up with a plan for paying for the damage. You've had 47 hours and 53 minutes. Do you have $2,000? Tyler's pacing stopped abruptly. "You know I don't have that kind of money, but I had some ideas." "Do you have $2,000? "No, but then we're filing the report." Linda made a small sound that might have been a sob or a gasp. "Maya, please, just listen to what Tyler has to say. He's been working so hard to come up with alternatives." Maya looked at her mother with something that felt like compassion mixed with exasperation. Linda genuinely believed that Tyler's last-minute scrambling represented sincere effort rather than desperate manipulation. She'd spent so many years interpreting Tyler's behavior through the lens of maternal love that she'd lost the ability to see his actions objectively. "Mom, Tyler had 2 days to demonstrate that he understood the seriousness of what he did. If he'd come to me yesterday with a concrete plan, a job offer, a loan agreement, anything that showed he was taking responsibility, we wouldn't be here. But instead, he spent 48 hours hoping I'd change my mind or accept a payment plan that would take 2 years to complete." David shifted in his seat, his discomfort evident in the way he kept checking his watch and adjusting his tie. "Maya, I understand you're upset, and Tyler was wrong to damage your property. But pressing criminal charges against your own brother, that's a step you can't take back. That's something that will affect his future opportunities, his ability to get jobs, his whole life trajectory." Maya felt a familiar wave of guilt crash over her. The trained response to her father's disappointment, the ingrained belief that Maya was responsible for managing everyone else's emotions and protecting them from uncomfortable realities. For a moment, she wavered,
imagining Tyler's face in a mugshot. Imagining explaining to future employers why her brother had a criminal record. Imagining family gatherings forever poisoned by this moment. Then she remembered the sound of metal scraping against paint at 2:47 a.m., the deliberate cruelty in Tyler's voice as he carved his resentment into her car, the careful planning that had gone into targeting something she'd worked months to afford. "Dad," Maya said quietly, "Tyler didn't think about future consequences when he decided to vandalize my car. He didn't consider how his choices might affect his opportunities or his relationship with his family. Why is it my responsibility to protect him from consequences he didn't bother to consider for himself?" David opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, his expression shifting as he processed Maya's question. For the first time in the conversation, he looked genuinely uncertain rather than simply disapproving. A police officer emerged from the back offices, a woman in her 40s with the kind of matter-of-fact competence that suggested she'd handled hundreds of family disputes exactly like this one. "Ms. Chen-Morrison, I'm Officer Rodriguez. I understand you want to file a vandalism report?" Maya stood up, feeling the weight of her family's stares as she followed Officer Rodriguez to a small interview room. Through the glass partition, she could see Tyler slumped in his chair with his head in his hands, while Linda rubbed his shoulders in the soothing gesture she'd used to comfort him since childhood. The interview process was surprisingly straightforward. Maya provided the dash cam footage, photos of the damage, and a detailed timeline of events.
Officer Rodriguez watched the recording with professional detachment, making notes on an official form that would transform Tyler's midnight rage into legal terminology. "This is pretty clear-cut," Officer Rodriguez said when the video ended. "We have the perpetrator clearly visible, audio recording of the crime in progress, and documented evidence of the damage. Your brother will likely be charged with criminal mischief in the third degree, which is a Class A misdemeanor in this state." Maya nodded, trying to process the reality that Tyler would soon have an arrest record. It felt surreal. Tyler, who'd never faced serious consequences for anything, officially classified as a criminal by the state justice system. "What happens next?" Maya asked. "We'll issue a warrant for his arrest. He can turn himself in, or we can pick him up at his residence. Either way, he'll be booked, arraigned, and released on his own recognizance pending trial. If he's convicted, he could face up to a year in jail and a fine of up to $1,000, though first-time offenders usually get community service and restitution." Restitution? Payment for damages, $2,000 based on the repair estimate you provided. Maya felt something settle in her chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but a sense of rightness, of balance being restored to a situation that had been deliberately skewed by Tyler's choices and her family's enabling response. When Maya returned to the waiting area, Tyler looked up with desperate hope that maybe she'd changed her mind, maybe the police had talked her out of pressing charges, maybe this nightmare could still be resolved through family negotiation rather than legal intervention. "The warrant will be issued this afternoon," Maya said simply. "Officer Rodriguez recommends that you turn yourself in rather than waiting to be arrested." Tyler's face went white. "Maya, please! I'll get the money somehow. I'll figure something out. Just give me one more chance." Maya looked at her brother, really looked at him, and felt a complex mixture of love and grief and relief. Love for the Tyler she remembered from childhood, who taught her to ride a bike and built blanket forts and shared midnight snacks during thunderstorms. Grief for the Tyler who might have been if he'd learned to take responsibility for his choices years ago. Relief that she was finally stepping out of the exhausting role of protecting him from himself.
"Tyler," she said gently, "I've been giving you chances for 8 years. I've covered for you, lent you money, made excuses for your behavior, and convinced myself that the next time would be different. But the only thing that's changed is that your problems have gotten bigger and more destructive." "So you are just giving up on me?" Maya shook her head. "I'm refusing to enable you anymore. There's a difference." Linda stood up abruptly, her composure finally cracking completely. "Maya, how can you be so cold? How can you watch your own brother fall apart and not feel anything?" Maya turned to face her mother, seeing years of misdirected maternal energy and misguided protection that had ultimately served to infantilize Tyler rather than help him grow into a responsible adult. "Mom, I feel everything. I feel sad that Tyler never learned to handle disappointment without lashing out at other people. I feel angry that he targeted me because I represent the success he's afraid to work for. I feel exhausted from years of being his emotional support system while he refused to develop his own coping skills. And I feel hopeful that maybe facing real consequences will finally motivate him to change." Maya gathered her paperwork and stood to leave, then turned back to address her family one final time. "I love Tyler. I will always love Tyler, but I'm done sacrificing my well-being to protect him from growing up. If he wants a relationship with me in the future, it needs to be based on mutual respect, rather than my willingness to absorb his anger and dysfunction." She walked out of the police station into the afternoon sunlight, feeling simultaneously lighter and heavier than she had in years. Lighter because she was no longer carrying the impossible burden of managing Tyler's emotions and consequences. Heavier because she was finally acknowledging the full weight of what her family had been asking her to sacrifice in service of Tyler's comfort. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "How did it go?" Maya typed back, "I think I just saved my brother's life,
by refusing to save him anymore. As she drove home, Maya found herself thinking about the ripple effects of this moment, how Tyler would respond to his first real consequences, how her parents would adjust to a family dynamic that didn't revolve around crisis management, and how she would learn to be Tyler's sister rather than her keeper. She didn't know what kind of relationship they might have in the future, or whether Tyler would use this experience as motivation for genuine change or simply as evidence that his family had abandoned him. But for the first time in years, Maya felt like she was choosing her own life instead of being conscripted into someone else's drama. The dashboard clock read 4:23 p.m. as Maya pulled into her driveway, noting the absence of scratches on her car's surface where the body shop had restored the damaged paint. The repair cost exactly $2,000, paid from her veterinary school savings, but Maya found she didn't resent the expense as much as she'd expected. Instead, she felt like she'd made an investment, not in car repairs, but in her own future, in the radical concept that she deserved to be treated with respect by the people who claimed to love her. Maya parked in the exact spot where Tyler had committed his act of vandalism 6 days earlier, then sat for a moment in the driver's seat, appreciating the simple pleasure of owning something that belonged entirely to her, unmarked by other people's anger, undamaged by other people's choices, protected by boundaries she was finally learning to maintain. Tomorrow, she would call the veterinary school admissions office and confirm her interview date. Tomorrow, she would schedule more MCAT prep sessions and research apartment listings in neighborhoods near the campus. Tomorrow, she would begin building the life she'd been postponing while trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved.
But today, she simply sat in her repaired car and felt proud of herself for choosing difficult love over easy enabling, for choosing her own future over her family's dysfunction, for choosing truth over the comfortable lies that had kept them all trapped in patterns that served no one. Maya's phone rang again, Linda's contact photo appearing on the screen, with another attempt to negotiate Tyler's way out of consequences. Maya looked at the phone, then turned it off and went inside to make dinner for one, finally understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you could do was let someone fall far enough to learn how to stand up on their own. 3 months later, Maya stood in the doorway of her new apartment, keys heavy in her palm as she took in the empty living room that would soon hold furniture she'd chosen herself, books she'd arrange according to her own system, photographs that captured memories she wanted to remember rather than ones that documented a family performance of happiness. The apartment was smaller than she'd dreamed, but entirely hers. No shared walls with Tyler's midnight gaming sessions, no tiptoeing around parents who mistook enabling for love, no carefully modulated conversations designed to avoid triggering Tyler's explosive reactions to accountability. The silence felt luxurious, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the neighbor's cat purring on the fire escape outside her bedroom window. Her phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "How's the new place? Ready for your housewarming party tomorrow?" Maya smiled as she typed back, "Ready to start my actual life." The criminal charges against Tyler had been resolved 6 weeks earlier with a plea bargain that required him to pay full restitution, complete 100 hours of community service, and attend court-mandated anger management classes. Maya had received her $2,000 in the form of a cashier's check delivered by their father, who apparently co-signed a loan to cover Tyler's debt. The money had gone directly toward apartment deposits and moving expenses, transforming Tyler's vandalism into Maya's independence in a way that felt like poetic justice. Tyler himself had surprised everyone by actually completing the community service requirements ahead of schedule, working with a nonprofit that maintained hiking trails in the county park system. According to Linda's weekly updates, which Maya received whether she wanted them or not, Tyler seemed to genuinely enjoy the physical work and the clear expectations that came with trail maintenance. He'd even expressed interest in pursuing certification as a park ranger, though Maya had learned to be cautiously optimistic about Tyler's career enthusiasms, rather than treat them as evidence of lasting change.
Maya's relationship with her parents had evolved into something more honest but less comfortable than their previous dynamic. David had eventually acknowledged that filing the police report had been necessary, though he still spoke about it in the careful language of someone processing difficult truths. Linda continued to hope for a magical reconciliation that would restore their family to some idealized version of closeness that had never actually existed. But she'd stopped asking Maya to sacrifice her boundaries for Tyler's emotional comfort. The most significant change had been Maya's realization that she didn't actually miss the chaos she'd grown up believing was normal family closeness. She'd spent years mistaking crisis management for intimacy, assuming that love required her to absorb other people's dysfunction and reflect it back as understanding and support. Learning to love her family from a healthy distance had been like discovering she'd been holding her breath for 23 years without realizing it. 6 months later, Maya's acceptance letter from veterinary school arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered to her apartment mailbox alongside bills and junk mail, as if life-changing news could be treated as routine correspondence. She read the letter 3 times, sitting on her living room floor, surrounded by MCAT prep books and application materials that had consumed her winter months.
Dear Ms. Chen-Morrison, the letter began, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted into the class of 2030 at the University of California Davis School of Veterinary Medicine. Maya felt tears gather in her eyes, not the complicated tears of family crisis or emotional manipulation, but the simple tears of someone whose hard work had finally paid off, whose dreams had been validated by an admissions committee that saw her potential rather than her willingness to sacrifice herself for other people's needs. She called Zoe first, then her parents, then her supervisor at the veterinary clinic who'd written one of her recommendation letters. Each conversation felt like a small celebration, a recognition that Maya had built something meaningful through her own efforts, rather than inheriting it or receiving it as compensation for managing other people's problems. Linda cried on the phone, happy tears mixed with the complicated grief of realizing that Maya's success had been achieved despite their family dynamics, rather than because of them. David expressed pride, tinged with bewilderment, as if he couldn't quite understand how Maya had found the strength to pursue her goals while maintaining boundaries that he'd been trained to see as selfishness. Tyler's response came in the form of a handwritten card delivered to Maya's apartment 2 days later. The outside featured a generic congratulations design from the grocery store card aisle. Inside, Tyler had written, Maya, I know I haven't been the brother you deserved. I'm proud of what you've accomplished and grateful that you didn't let my problems stop you from chasing your dreams. I hope someday I can be someone you're proud to call family again. Love, Tyler. Maya read the note 3 times, searching for manipulation or hidden agendas or emotional pressure disguised as support. But the words felt genuine in a way that Tyler's communications hadn't for years. Honest about his shortcomings without asking her to fix them, supportive of her success without making it about his own needs, hopeful about their future relationship without demanding immediate forgiveness. Maya kept the card, but didn't respond immediately. She was learning to trust gradually rather than reflexively, to let people prove their growth through consistent actions rather than accepting promises as evidence of change. If Tyler was genuinely different, time would demonstrate that. If he wasn't, at least Maya wouldn't be disappointed by investing emotional energy in another false transformation. 1 year later. Maya's first-year veterinary school grades arrived via email during her summer break, which she was spending working at an emergency animal hospital in Davis to gain experience before her second year began. The grades were better than she'd dared hope, mostly A's with 1 B+ in gross anatomy, a subject that had challenged her more than she'd expected, but that she'd eventually mastered through the same methodical persistence that had gotten her through Tyler's destruction of her car and her family's attempts to minimize the consequences of that selfishness. She was living in a shared house with 3 other veterinary students, women who understood the intensity of their program and who created a supportive environment that felt nothing like the competitive comparisons Maya had grown up with. They studied together, cooked elaborate meals on weekends, and offered each other the kind of genuine encouragement that Maya was still learning to accept without suspicion. Maya's relationship with her family had settled into a comfortable distance, maintained through weekly phone calls and monthly visits that never extended beyond a single overnight stay. Tyler had indeed completed his park ranger certification and was working full-time for the county, maintaining trails and leading educational programs for school groups. He seemed genuinely content with work that matched his skills and provided clear structure, though Maya remained cautiously optimistic rather than fully trusting that this represented permanent change. More importantly, Tyler had stopped expecting Maya to manage his emotional needs or provide endless second chances for behavior that hurt other people. Their interactions were cordial but limited, like former neighbors who occasionally ran into each other at the grocery store. Polite, superficially warm, but not intimate in ways that required Maya to absorb Tyler's problems or sacrifice her own well-being. Linda had eventually started attending therapy herself, initially to understand why Maya had become so distant, but gradually to examine her own patterns of enabling and the way she'd confused maternal love with removing natural consequences for her children's choices.
Reported these insights to Maya with the enthusiasm of someone making genuine discoveries about herself, though Maya noticed that Linda still struggled to fully accept responsibility for the family dynamics she'd helped create. David had surprised everyone by being the most adaptable to Maya's new boundaries. Perhaps his legal training had prepared him to accept evidence-based conclusions, even when they challenged his emotional preferences. He'd begun treating Maya more like an independent adult, rather than a family resource to be deployed in Tyler-related crises. And their conversations had gradually evolved to focus on Maya's goals and interests, rather than Tyler's latest problems. 2 years later. Maya was in her 3rd year of veterinary school, specializing in emergency and critical care, when she received a phone call that would test everything she'd learned about boundaries and family loyalty. Tyler had been arrested for driving under the influence, his first serious legal trouble since the vandalism charge 3 years earlier. Linda called Maya at 11:30 p.m., sobbing into the phone about bail money and lawyers and how Tyler was going to lose his job with the county if he got convicted of a DUI. Maya listened to her mother's panic with the detached compassion of someone who'd learned to separate other people's emergencies from her own responsibilities. "Mom," Maya said when Linda finally paused for breath, "I'm sorry that Tyler made this choice. I know it's scary for you, but this isn't my problem to solve." "But Maya, he's family. He needs our support right now." "He needs to face the consequences of drinking and driving, which could have killed someone. Me giving him money or emotional support right now would just teach him that other people will clean up his messes, which is exactly the lesson that led to him keying my car 3 years ago." The silence on the phone line felt different than the silences Maya remembered from earlier family crises. This time, Linda didn't immediately launch into guilt-based manipulation or emotional pressure tactics. Instead, Maya heard something that sounded like reluctant understanding. "You're not going to help him," Linda said, her voice flat with resignation rather than anger. "I'm not going to enable him," Maya corrected. "If Tyler wants help becoming a person who doesn't drink and drive, I'd be happy to support that. But I'm not going to help him avoid consequences for choices that could have killed innocent people." Tyler ended up serving 30 days in jail, losing his county job, and spending 6 months in an intensive outpatient treatment program for alcohol abuse. Maya sent him books about addiction recovery and wrote supportive letters that focused on his potential for growth, rather than minimizing the seriousness of his choices. She visited him once during his incarceration, not to rescue or comfort him, but to demonstrate that their relationship could include accountability without abandoning love. The Tyler who emerged from jail and treatment was different in ways that felt more substantial than his previous transformations.
He found work with a private landscaping company, moved into a sober living facility, and began attending AA meetings with the consistency of someone who'd finally accepted that his problems required ongoing management rather than quick fixes. Most importantly, he stopped expecting his family to provide emotional and financial bailouts when his choices created problems. 5 years later. Maya's veterinary degree graduation ceremony took place on a sunny May morning in Davis, with her parents and Zoe in the audience cheering as she walked across the stage to receive her diploma. Tyler had wanted to attend, but was working a critical project for his landscaping company, a demonstration of the kind of priority setting that Maya had never seen from him before his arrest. He sent flowers instead, with a card that read, "Dr. Maya Chen-Morrison, I'm proud of the person you've become despite having me as a brother. Thank you for loving me enough to let me fail until I learned how to succeed."
Maya kept the card on her desk at the emergency veterinary clinic where she'd accepted a position as an associate veterinarian. The job was demanding and emotionally intense, requiring her to make life and death decisions for animals while supporting their families through crisis situations. Maya found herself drawing on skills she'd learned during her family's dysfunction, the ability to remain calm under pressure, to separate her own emotions from other people's emergencies, to offer support without taking responsibility for outcomes she couldn't control. The difference was that now she was using those skills in service of her own values and professional goals, rather than to manage someone else's refusal to grow up. Maya's apartment had evolved into a home filled with plants, books, and photographs that captured genuine moments of joy rather than performed family harmony. She developed friendships based on mutual interests and respect, rather than shared crisis management. She'd even begun dating, carefully, gradually, with attention to red flags that she'd learned to recognize through painful experience with family dysfunction. Most importantly, Maya had learned to trust her own judgment rather than constantly second-guessing her reactions to other people's behavior. The dash cam that had started everything sat in her desk drawer now, no longer needed for evidence, but kept as a reminder that sometimes the most important truths required technology to reveal them, that sometimes loving someone meant refusing to be their safety net, that sometimes family meant learning to say no with compassion rather than enabling with guilt. 7 years later, Maya was promoted to senior veterinarian at the emergency clinic on the same day she received an invitation to Tyler's wedding. The envelope arrived at her new house, a small 2-bedroom home with a fenced yard where she could foster rescue dogs between permanent placements, with her name written in Tyler's now steady handwriting. Inside, she found an invitation to a small ceremony at a county park where Tyler would marry Sarah, a woman he'd met in AA who worked as an elementary school teacher and shared his love of hiking. The invitation was simple and genuine, free of the dramatic flourishes that had characterized Tyler's previous attempts to perform growth and responsibility. Maya called Tyler that evening, the first time they'd spoken directly in over a year. "I got your invitation," she said. "Congratulations." "Thanks, Maya. I know we haven't talked much lately, but I wanted you to know that Sarah has made me want to be the kind of person who deserves good things instead of the kind of person who expects them." Maya felt something shift in her chest, not forgiveness exactly, because forgiveness implied that Tyler had harmed her and needed absolution. Instead, she felt recognition that Tyler had finally become someone she could respect. Someone who took responsibility for his choices and their consequences. Someone who'd learned to love without demanding rescue. "I'd like to come to the wedding," Maya said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "Really?" Tyler's voice carried genuine surprise rather than the calculated vulnerability she remembered from years past. "Tyler, you becoming a healthy person doesn't require me to pretend the unhealthy years didn't happen, but it also doesn't mean I can't celebrate who you are now." The wedding took place on a crisp October afternoon, with golden leaves scattered across the park pavilion and 20 guests arranged in folding chairs borrowed from the county maintenance department where Tyler had once worked.
Maya sat in the second row, watching her brother exchange vows with a woman who looked at him with clear-eyed affection rather than the desperate hope Maya remembered from their mother's expressions during Tyler's worst years.
Sarah's vows were refreshingly honest. Tyler, I love who you are today and who you're working to become tomorrow. I promise to support your recovery, celebrate your growth, and hold you accountable when you need it most. Tyler's response was equally grounded. Sarah, you taught me that love isn't about finding someone who will clean up my messes, but about becoming someone worthy of building a life with. Maya found herself crying during the ceremony, not tears of family obligation or complicated grief, but simple happiness for two people who'd found each other after learning how to be whole individually. When Tyler and Sarah kissed at the altar, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years, uncomplicated pride in her brother. The reception was held in the same pavilion, with food catered by a local restaurant and music provided by Sarah's friend who played acoustic guitar. Maya spent the afternoon talking with Sarah's family and Tyler's coworkers, people who knew him as the reliable guy who always showed up on time and stayed late to finish projects properly. To them, Tyler wasn't a cautionary tale about enabling and consequences. He was simply a good man who took his responsibilities seriously. Maya? Sarah approached her during a lull in the music, holding 2 glasses of sparkling cider. Tyler talks about you all the time. He says you saved his life by refusing to save him. Maya accepted the glass, considering how to respond to such a loaded statement. I think Tyler saved his own life. I just stopped getting in his way. Sarah smiled, the kind of expression that suggested she understood family dynamics more complex than they appeared on the surface. He told me about the car, about the police report, about how angry your parents were when you pressed charges. He said it was the first time anyone had ever held him accountable without trying to fix him afterward. How do you feel about marrying someone with a criminal record? Maya asked, genuinely curious. I feel like I'm marrying someone who learned from his mistakes instead of repeating them. Tyler's arrest record tells me he's human. His behavior since then tells me he's committed to growth. Maya looked across the pavilion to where Tyler was helping elderly guests navigate the uneven ground, his movements patient and attentive rather than performatively helpful. This version of Tyler, steady, reliable, considerate without expecting credit, was someone Maya genuinely liked rather than simply loved out of familial obligation. Later that evening, as the reception wound down and guests began gathering their belongings, Tyler approached Maya with the careful respect of someone who'd learned not to assume forgiveness or closeness. Maya, thank you for coming. It means more than you know. Thank you for inviting me. Sarah seems wonderful. She is. Tyler paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. Maya, I know I can't undo the damage I caused or the years I stole from you by making me your emotional caretaker, but I want you to know that everything good in my life now exists because you had the courage to stop enabling me. Maya felt tears prick her eyes, though whether from sadness or relief or simple exhaustion, she couldn't tell. Tyler, I'm proud of who you've become, not because it validates my choices, but because you deserve to be happy in a way that doesn't hurt other people. They hugged briefly, the first physical contact they'd shared in years that felt entirely genuine, free from manipulation or desperate reconciliation attempts. When they separated, Maya saw something in Tyler's eyes that she'd never seen before. Peace. Not the temporary calm of someone between crises, but the deep serenity of someone who'd learned to accept responsibility for his own happiness.
10 years later, Maya was reviewing surgery notes in her home office when her phone rang with a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Emergency veterinarians learn to protect their off hours fiercely. But something about the timing felt significant. Maya? It's Tyler. Do you have a minute? Maya leaned back in her chair, noting how Tyler's voice had changed over the years. Gone was the underlying tension that had characterized their conversations even during his better periods. Now he sounded genuinely relaxed, calling to share news rather than crisis-manage problems. Of course. How are you and Sarah? We're good, really good. Actually, that's why I'm calling. We wanted to tell you before we told Mom and Dad. Sarah's pregnant. We're having a baby. Maya felt a complex mixture of emotions wash over her. Joy for Tyler and Sarah, who'd built the kind of stable relationship that could support a child, curiosity about what kind of father Tyler would become, and, unexpectedly, a deep sense of completion, as if this phone call represented the final chapter of a story that had begun with scratches on a car and evolved into something none of them could have predicted. Tyler, that's wonderful! How are you feeling about becoming a father? Terrified and excited in equal measure, Tyler admitted with a laugh, but mostly grateful that our kid will have two parents who know how to take responsibility for their choices. Sarah and I have been talking about what kind of family we want to create, and we both agree that we want to raise someone who understands that love and accountability go together. Maya smiled, remembering the Tyler who'd once believed that love meant never having to face consequences for harmful behavior. You're gonna be great parents. Tyler, can I ask you something? Sure. When the baby's old enough, would you be willing to be part of their life? Not as the aunt who swoops in to fix problems, but as someone who shows them what it looks like to have boundaries and dreams and self-respect. Maya felt tears gather in her eyes, happy tears this time, uncomplicated by years of manipulation and enabling. I would love that, Tyler. I would absolutely love that. After hanging up, Maya sat in her home office surrounded by veterinary journals and continuing education materials, thinking about the decade-long journey that had brought her family to this point. The dash cam that had started everything was long gone, replaced by newer technology in her current car. But the lessons it had taught her about truth, consequences, and the difference between enabling and love had become foundational principles that guided every relationship in her life. Maya's own life had flourished in ways she couldn't have imagined during those dark months when Tyler's problems consumed every family gathering. She'd built a successful veterinary practice, purchased her dream home, developed friendships based on mutual respect rather than crisis management, and even found love with David, a fellow veterinarian who understood her dedication to animal welfare and supported her commitment to maintaining healthy boundaries with family. Most importantly, Maya had learned to trust her own judgment and value her own well-being without guilt or apology. She'd discovered that saying no to unhealthy dynamics didn't make her selfish. It made her strong enough to say yes to relationships and opportunities that aligned with her values. The family gatherings now were smaller, but more genuine. Linda had learned to enjoy her children's company without needing to manage their problems. David had developed individual relationships with Maya and Tyler based on their actual interests, rather than treating them as a single unit requiring coordinated management. Tyler brought Sarah and eventually their daughter Emma to holidays, contributing to family traditions rather than disrupting them with drama. 15 years later, Maya was in her car driving home from the clinic when she noticed something that made her smile. A young woman was standing beside a keyed car in a parking lot, taking photos with her phone while talking to someone who was clearly trying to convince her not to file a police report. Maya pulled into a nearby parking space and approached the young woman, recognizing the expression of someone torn between family loyalty and self-respect. "Excuse me," Maya said gently. "I couldn't help noticing your car. Are you okay?" The young woman looked up with tears in her eyes. "My brother keyed my car because I wouldn't lend him money for rent. My parents are saying I can't prove it was him, but I have a dash cam that recorded everything. They want me to just let it go because family doesn't call police on family." Maya felt a wave of recognition so strong it took her breath away. This young woman was standing at the exact crossroads Maya had faced 15 years earlier, the choice between enabling family dysfunction or choosing her own well-being, despite the guilt and pressure from people who claim to love her. "Can I tell you something?" Maya asked. 15 years ago, I was exactly where you are right now. My brother keyed my car, my parents said I couldn't prove it, and I had dash cam footage that showed everything." The young woman's eyes widened. "What did you do?" "I filed the police report. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done and the best decision I ever made. Not because I wanted to hurt my brother, but because I finally understood that protecting people from consequences doesn't help them grow. It just teaches them that their choices don't matter. Maya pulled out her phone and showed the young woman a recent photo from Emma's 5th birthday party. Tyler pushing his daughter on a swing, while Sarah laughed in the background, all of them genuinely happy in a way that had nothing to do with performance or crisis management. "This is my brother now," Maya said. "He's a wonderful father, a dedicated husband, and someone I genuinely enjoy spending time with. But none of that growth happened until I stopped enabling his destructive choices and started holding him accountable for them." The young woman stared at the photo, then back at her keyed car, then at Maya with something that looked like hope mixed with terror. "But what if filing the report destroys our relationship forever?" Maya remembered asking herself the same question 15 years earlier, remembered the weight of that fear, and the way it had almost convinced her to accept Tyler's token apology and minimal payment plan. If holding someone accountable for destroying your property ruins your relationship, then the relationship was already broken, Maya said gently. You just didn't realize it yet. Maya gave the young woman her business card with her personal number written on the back. "If you need someone to talk to who understands exactly what you're going through, call me. Whatever you decide, make sure it's a decision you can live with, not one that's designed to manage other people's emotions." Driving home, Maya thought about the circular nature of healing, how the lessons learned through her own painful growth could now serve as guidance for someone else facing the same impossible choice between family loyalty and self-respect. The dash cam had given her evidence, but courage had given her the strength to act on that evidence despite enormous pressure to prioritize other people's comfort over her own well-being. That evening, Maya received a text from the young women. "I filed the report. Thank you for showing me that love and accountability can coexist." Maya forwarded the message to Tyler with a note, "Thought you'd appreciate knowing that your growth story is helping other people find their courage." Tyler's response came back immediately. "That's the best legacy I could ask for. Thank you for loving me enough to let me fall until I learned how to stand." Maya saved both messages, adding them to a collection of texts and emails that documented her family's transformation from dysfunction to health, from enabling to accountability, from performed harmony to genuine peace.
The dashcam was long gone, but its legacy lived on in every healthy boundary Maya maintained, every consequence she allowed people to experience, every relationship she built on mutual respect rather than crisis management. Sometimes the smallest devices captured the most important truths, and sometimes the most loving thing you could do was refuse to look away from what those truths revealed. Maya pulled into her driveway, unmarked by vandalism, protected by boundaries she'd learned to maintain, and smiled at the simple pleasure of coming home to a life she'd built through her own choices rather than inherited through family obligation. The recording light had indeed captured everything, but more importantly, Maya had found the courage to watch. Thank you for listening to this story about Maya, Tyler, and the dash cam that changed everything. This tale explores one of the most difficult lessons many of us face, learning the difference between loving someone and enabling them, between supporting family and sacrificing ourselves for their dysfunction. Maya's journey from enabler to boundary setter isn't just a story about sibling conflict. It's about the courage required to choose our own well-being when family systems pressure us to maintain harmful dynamics. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is step back and let people experience the natural consequences of their choices. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to have you join our community of listeners who are interested in exploring complex family dynamics, personal growth, and sometimes the painful process of learning to put ourselves first without guilt.